We have some great perspectives to share with you all this morning. First up, I am very excited to introduce our first keynoter, Stephen Fluin. Stephen is a developer expert and advocate at Google, and he's responsible for leading the charge for Google on Angular. Stephen and Google are strong partners with Progress, working with our team on building with NativeScript and Angular. Stephen's an advisor and consultant to hundreds of companies, a serial entrepreneur, a known mobility expert, a big fan of wearables and IoT. Stephen, interestingly, also speaks 5 languages: Bulgarian, English, French, German, Spanish, and this is the coolest part, I hear he can speak interchangeably with either a British or an American accent. So that one's very interesting. Stephen also has many interests. One of them is, actually, I found out, is drone flying. And so I have to do some matchmaking between Stephen and our CTO, Dimitri, and get those guys to meet. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm so excited to be able to introduce to you this morning Stephen Fluin.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. So when Progress invited me out, and we figured out that we wanted to talk about rethinking application development with Angular and NativeScript, I was really excited about this. This is actually one of my passions. I have this personal philosophy about using the right tools for the right job in order to encourage productivity for our lives. So a little bit about myself. As you said, I lead developer relations for the Angular team at Google. I have a long history of doing consulting, working with both startups, mid-sized companies, and large enterprises. Really, on the Angular team, my role has 2 parts to my mission. First, I'm responsible for helping developers and organizations be successful with their use of Angular. And second, it's my job to understand what it's like being a developer in the real world, understanding the day-to-day challenges that we all face so that we can use those understandings to inform what we do on the Angular team at Google. On a day-to-day basis, I manage our GDE program, which is our certification program that identifies experts out in the field who are using Angular and building communities around Angular. I also lead a lot of our partnerships, including some of our work that we're doing with Progress. I also work with enterprises, and so I understand what it's like to be building applications at scale, where you don't just have a small team of 4 or 5 developers, but maybe a team of a few hundred developers, or a few thousand developers split across multiple product lines, split across shared services, and all these sorts of very complex structures. We've heard a lot at ProgressNEXT about this idea of building adaptive experiences. We really want to understand the context that a user brings with them to their engagements with us, and build experiences that are going to adapt and flex to the needs of the user. And this is something that really makes a lot of sense for us. I like to look back at the web as it's been over the last few years and identify that in some ways, it's actually changed again. If we look at the applications that we were even building just 5 years ago, they were fundamentally different than the applications that we're seeing being built today. And it's all about experience. If you look across kind of millions of different applications that are being built today in 2018, these applications are starting to look different. These applications are richer in terms of the functionality that they're offering. They're creating more engaging experiences for users. I like to say that these applications are somewhat user-optimized, using things like animations in a way that they've never been used before. A lot of us think about things like animations, and we think, oh, that's needless delight for the user. It's a piece of branding that we don't actually need as part of our application. But more and more, we're identifying that these sorts of experiences are critical to us building enterprise and business line of applications. It's all about the user experience. We've watched for many years this trend of consumerization of IT, and this is continuing more and more all the time. When we build an experience, if we can use things like animations to not only give this level of delight, but also give a level of intuitability to our experiences, we're going to be more effective at doing what we do. We're also seeing huge trends of multi-modality, where we have to build these applications not just for the screens that we think or want users to use, but whatever that they bring to the table, whether that's voice and assistance, whether that's their mobile device, whether that's their desktop or laptop computer. The web is a much more productive place than it used to be. Historically, if we look back to how we used to build applications, there was a bit of a hands-off experience. The server would generate a page. It would generate some sort of experience with some static content. That would then be transferred down to users. Users would then understand and look at the page. They would then choose to do an interaction, like hit a save button or a submit button. That would go back up to the server, and then we'd figure out what to do with it from there. But if we think about building productive applications in 2018 and beyond, this isn't a viable model anymore. We actually have to think about how do we deliver experiences that are almost instantaneous, so that the user, as soon as they create an activity or a task, they're getting immediate response back. And this is why we're seeing this ginormous shift across many different software development platforms towards the front end, towards client-side experiences. And so while we're solving a lot of the same problems that we've been solving for many years, we need to do it closer to the user and with the user's experience more at the forefront of our mind. We talked about how we've got multi-modal experiences, and these experiences that need to adapt to the context of the user. And we're seeing a big trend across the web where using skills, such as web development skills, you can now use the skills that you're already used to and take those skills further. You can bring them to more devices. If you are a web developer today, you can build experiences for the web. You can use new capabilities, such as progressive web applications, or the service worker APIs that are now available to build web experiences that work entirely offline. Or you can be building applications that ship on desktop using something like Electron. Or you can be building rich native experiences on mobile devices using NativeScript. So I want to reflect a little bit on why did this happen? What's happening to our users and what's happening to the ecosystems that are driving these changes for us? So the first thing I like to think about is that the users are changing. I put up a photo here. So I've actually kept every phone that I've owned, all the way back from my tiny little flip phone where I thought, oh, it's the tiniest phone. That's going to be the best phone ever, right? But we wanted to do more, and so phones got bigger. The devices that we started using got more powerful. I hear from a lot of people that they think, oh, I'll never want to do that on my phone. I always need a desktop for that. But I always challenge that idea, because even things like video editing can now be done on mobile. Any activity that you are today saying, we can only do this on desktop, I want you to reconsider that. Because it's probably not a limitation of the user or the technology. It's probably a limitation in terms of how you're building the experiences that's preventing your users from engaging and being portable with their mobile device. I also say that the mobile revolution is a little bit over, right? The users ended up winning. We want to build experiences for the users wherever they are. And there's actually a few different statistics out there that really underscore this idea. So I go to a few conferences. Some of them are in countries like China. And one of the stats I heard was that 91% of web traffic, so that's traffic coming from a browser, being initiated by a browser, is coming from a mobile device. And you have to reflect on this disparity that exists between how we develop and how we design applications and how our users are actually using them. If 91% of users are on mobile devices, even when they're using our web experiences, how should we be changing what we build? Should we be building on these high-speed, high-powered, high-connectivity devices on the desktop? Or do we need to start in an emulated mode? Do we need to start thinking about the context and the experience that our users are going to be using in the real world? I went onto the Internet Archive and the Wayback Machine, and I pulled up the Progress website back from 2004. And I contrasted that with the Progress website that exists today. And you'll notice they're both really good websites for the time. And what I like to say is that the user's expectations have changed. I sometimes call this the tyranny of the user. Because you could have built the perfect experience back in 2004, or you could build a perfect experience in 2018, but the users are not static. Every day, your users are continuing to say, hey, I want more out of the applications that I use. And so unfortunately, we're not able to stay static either. We have to be thinking of, when we're delivering these experiences across many different devices, not only what are our users expecting today, but what are the new capabilities that they're going to be expecting tomorrow and the day after that? Because I feel like this is a really critical part of really understanding the user and continuing to stay viable and help our users be productive. Users today expect very, very rich applications. And so I talked about this idea that when you hit save or submit, you should do something instantly instead of showing a progress bar. We actually call this optimistic UIs. Because you can optimistically say, hey, I know that the application's probably going to work. I'm probably going to have network connectivity. And if something goes wrong, I can then back the user out of that action. I can show a little bar that says, hey, something went wrong. Let's do this a little bit differently. But by having an optimistic UI, you're getting out of the way of your users. Do not have your users sitting there waiting for a spinner to disappear to let them know that they've been successful. Because what we've seen is, just from a psychological perspective, waiting creates task switching. Anytime you take an application and make a user wait for more than 2 seconds, even if they don't click away, even if they don't pull out another app on their phone, they're doing mental task switching. They're starting to think, hey, what else is going on in my life? What am I having for dinner? And this task switching ends up killing productivity. And so as much as possible, we need to build applications that are more engaging by focusing on this experience. By moving more of our experience to the client side, we can eliminate this extra waiting that we're creating for our users and keep them engaged, keep them productive with our application. There was a statistic from the American Psychological Association that in a given day for an employee, around 40% of their time is lost to task switching. And so think about how much of that time you could recapture if you were able to eliminate the waiting and build more engaging and more immersive experiences. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about Angular. So as many of us know, and we've heard a lot at ProgressNext here this week, Angular is a platform that tries to make it easy to build applications with the web. And we say with the web and not for the web, because as we've heard, Angular in many ways is about helping you take your applications further using tools like NativeScript. The Angular team, we have 3 values that I really think it's important to understand because it informs a lot of what we do and how we think about the future. So first, we value applications that users love to use. At the end of the day, the reason we're all in this room, the reason that we're all doing our jobs, is because of the users. Whether it's engaging with a new customer that wants to purchase our services or products, whether that's empowering our employees, it always comes down to the user. If you're not serving the user, you're not going to be successful. But at the same time, we value applications that developers love to build. And so Angular focuses a lot on developer experience and understanding the end-to-end journey that every developer is going to face as part of being part of a product team. Everything from how do I get started, how do I make technology choices about what I'm going to be using and how I'm going to be using it, all the way to how do I build and ship these applications into production to make sure that I am going to have these great user experiences. And last but not least, we think about a community where everyone feels welcome. And this is a really core tenet for our team, and we spend a lot of time focusing on community. Because when you have a community and an ecosystem where people are building and contributing back, that's really one of the best ways to be successful and build momentum for the long term. One of my favorite quotes is that no matter what company you work for, whether it's Progress or Google, there's always going to be more smart people outside of your company than inside of your company. And this is really interesting to reflect on because it really informs that maybe you should always be thinking, how do I engage other folks to help? How do I bring in a community to help us both work together better? And that's part of why we're here today with Progress. I pulled up some of the content that Progress has on their website. And I feel like Angular is actually really well aligned with the outcomes that Progress is trying to create. Everything from more user engagement, how do we build these rich, engaging experiences that are going to make our users happier and more delighted? How do we reduce time to market? And I'll talk a little bit later about this, but for Google, having the organizational agility to change software very quickly is critical. But then also, how do we focus on this idea of efficiency so that we can build applications faster and cheaper and allow developers to focus less time on boilerplate and less time on the underlying mechanics and more time on the value creation and doing the things that they really love to do? One of the core challenges that we're seeing across the ecosystem and that the Angular team is trying to take on head-on is this idea of balancing stability and innovation. Every day, there are more and more software tools available to us. There's new product suites launching all of the time, and they're taking advantage of newer capabilities. And this ecosystem is experiencing what I call a combinatorial explosion, where every tool and every combination of tools is creating a different type of value. And so our question is, how do we capture that, but at the same time have reliable and expectable development workflows so that we can continue to reuse the existing skill sets that we have? When I build an Angular application today, I want to be able to build the same Angular application tomorrow using the same skill sets that I have. And so this is something that we're spending a lot of time on. One of the ways that we talk about Angular as it's being a modern web developer's platform. And there's lots of really great examples of this. One is actually on the screen here, which is an article from Forbes about Angular. But Forbes itself actually uses Angular both for the rendering of the client-side experience, but they're also really focused on how do we enrich that experience further. And so they do things like server-side rendering of their Angular application so that you have a complete set of HTML that gets shipped to the browser, so you get a very fast initial load. But then you still balance that with the richness of the experience that's client-side so that every user interaction can be as instantaneous as possible. And when we do all these things right, we're really getting a couple benefits. We're not only going to get application developers that are more productive, that are building better experiences, that are more engaging and delivering better value for our users, we're also going to see that they're being more efficient in doing so. So again, saving time, saving money in doing so. So we really think about Angular in a few different ways. So one of the things that Angular is trying to do is to help developers move faster with a set of fully integrated tools. So if you look across the Angular ecosystem, there's a lot of tools that we give you out of the box by default. Everything from a command line interface, or CLI, that helps you move quickly in terms of getting a new project set up, creating new components, creating new functionality. We have a router that's really good at mapping URL state into the state of a component so that you know what to be rendering at any given time. We have libraries that help you make HTTP requests and interact with backend data very richly. We have a set of forms libraries that really acknowledges the fact that when we're interacting with our users, it's not a one-way conversation. We're not just being given data. We need to have a conversation with the user, telling them what's the status of their data. Is this correct? Are they doing things right? Do they need a little guidance? Do they need a little assistance as they're building out their application? To things like animations, which I talked about before, or internationalization. And so we really have this set of opinionated tools. And I would actually include NativeScript as one of those tools. We feel like NativeScript is the best way to build native experiences using Angular. And while we choose these things as defaults, and we're testing all of these things together, and we're making sure that these are a great set of capabilities, there's a benefit there in that you bring a new employee on board. You can expect that if they know Angular, they're going to know the common set of tools. But we do this in a way that doesn't eliminate freedom. You still have the choice to swap out one of these pieces and use whatever tooling you need that's right for your project. And this is really critical to us. We also want to help development teams scale better. And so from the very, very start, Angular really focuses on maintainability and collaboration on teams. You can see this with some of our testing tools, such as Protractor and Karma, where when you generate a new project with Angular, we're going to give you tests out of the box. Now, we know not everyone does what they should. Not everyone is going to be doing end-to-end and unit testing. But our thought is that if we give you these things out of the box, you're much more likely to be successful, and you're much more likely to use them. Because we feel that, and we've seen at Google, that robust strategies for testing are critical to the longevity of a software platform. We also have tools like our language service, where we have IDE support for understanding what's going on semantically under the hood of an application. So for example, when you're modifying an HTML file and you fat finger something and you have a typo, we can actually reconcile that with the component and the code that is referring to that template file and tell you, hey, something's not right, or this is the wrong type and you're using this in the wrong way. And that sort of tooling is really focused on building applications that are going to be correct, maintainable, but we also focus on things like collaboration. So how do we take an application and break it up into pieces that different people, different team members can focus on? If you think of a standard Angular application, you've got a module layer, which you can think of as the architecture of your application. You've got components, which developers can focus on. You also have things like style sheets and HTML templates, which you can have more of a designer focus on. And so we're not just focused on scaling to millions or billions of users, but how do you scale to large teams that have to collaborate and work in a single code base? We also want developers to be able to reach further with their existing skills. And so when you build an Angular application, we're going to guide you down a path that really ensures that you can take that same application and build it for the web and deliver it via browser, deliver it offline with a progressive web application, deliver it on desktop with something like Electron, or ship it into native and installed app stores using something like NativeScript. And this is really key for us because we feel like we can take this skill set that a lot of us have and make it more valuable. Another goal of the Angular team is that we want to take the best of what Google has and kind of bring it to the world when it comes to thinking about software development and the challenges. So one thing a lot of people don't know about Google is that we keep all of our source code in a single source code repository. So virtually everything from Gmail to Google Web Search all lives in the same source code repository. And when you combine that with what we call our one version policy, which says any dependency or any version of code, you can only have exactly one copy of it across the entire code base, this actually creates a huge amount of agility for an organization. I think back to 2014 with the Heartbleed SSL bug. How many people heard about Heartbleed or were affected by that? So this was a really big security vulnerability across the entire internet. But because Google only had one version of SSL in the company, we were able to patch it in that one place and very, very quickly roll that out across the entire organization. This sort of agility is kind of unheard of when you think about having tens of thousands of engineers collaborating on a huge suite of products. And we feel like having things like a mono repository can help developers do that. But in order for this to be successful, in order for this to work, you also have to have really fast incremental builds and tests. So if you work at Google and you actually deploy a new Angular application or an update to an Angular application, as needed and with very intelligent caching, we're going to rebuild your application. We're going to rebuild Angular. We're going to rebuild Node. We're going to rebuild the Linux kernel. We'll rebuild GCC so that you have a single cohesive state that is always up to date and always working very well. And so as I said, part of the Angular team's mission is to bring some of these sorts of technologies out to the world. And so the fast and incremental build and test, we've actually open sourced the build system that we use at Google as something called Bazel. And so the Angular team has recently adopted Bazel in our open source project, as well as we're trying to make it possible for developers to take advantage of Bazel. One of the coolest parts about Bazel is that you can actually use it in mixed environments. So if you have .NET code, you have Java code, you have iOS code, you have web code, and you need to compile all these things, they have interdependencies, Bazel is capable of doing all of that with a single system. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the products that we've been building and the way that we think about the partnership with Progress. We've been really working closely with Progress. We actually had a few of their team members in our office all last week. We're chatting on a weekly basis because we feel like there's a really good match there. We really like empowering developers using Progress's tools, right? So if you are a NativeScript user, you are a Kendo UI user, we want to empower you more with Angular. But we also want to help Progress, and we want to make it easier, if you're an Angular developer, to get started with things like NativeScript. And so we love that they've taken our logo, and they actually put together this NativeScript Angular logo, which I'm a really big fan of. Because we see like this is a collaboration that can continue to grow and continue to deliver a lot of value for developers and for users. And so going back to this idea of stability and innovation, one of the tools that we recently launched, and we're working very closely with the NativeScript team to take advantage of this, is a tool called ng-update. So typically in the web development world, you have lots and lots of dependencies. And they're always updating. And whenever you want to make a conscious effort to update your dependencies, something's going to break, and you have to go back to your application and fix it. And so this is a challenge that the Angular team is kind of taking head on with our ng-update command. And so there's the traditional dependency side. So when I run ng-update at Angular/core, it's going to update my dependencies in my version of Angular core. But it's going to do a bunch of other things as well. So we've defined something called a package group. And so we're going to keep a bunch of the Angular packages all together in sync. So we're going to update Angular core, common, compiler, platform browser dynamic, all these sorts of different packages that you need. And we're going to update them all together. We're also going to update all of your peer dependencies. So this is something that the package managers don't do a great job of today. So when you run this command, you're going to update RxJS, Zone.js, and TypeScript. So we're trying to better manage the dependency side. But we're also doing something very important here, where for each of these packages that gets updated via ng-update, we're looking for something called a schematic under the hood. And what that schematic is able to do is it's able to not only say, how did the dependency change, but how should my application change to react to that change? So for example, when you install RxJS version 6 with ng-update, they've actually removed a bunch of APIs. They've deprecated a lot of work and removed it as part of the RxJS 6 update. And so many times that could be a painful update for developers. But because of ng-update, we're actually going to install RxJS compatibility library so that your code keeps working. And so when we think about tools like NativeScript, we want to empower them to, if they need to make a breaking change, we want to empower them to make that change for you in your application in many cases and have a level of automation. Another place where we're working closely with them is with ng-add. So ng-add is designed to add capabilities to an existing Angular application. So whether this is something that's been newly scaffolded out, or whether it's an existing application you've been working on for a while, we want you to be able to just run ng-add NativeScript and take a previously web-only experience and then add on top of that the NativeScript native mobile layer and walk away with kind of a hybrid application that's capable of building for the web, it's capable of building for iOS, for Android, where we can share most of the same code base. And part of the magic of this is that we can try and unify the tool sets a little bit. NativeScript has a CLI, Angular has a CLI, but using ng-add, we can kind of take advantage of the best of both so that you can stay within one tool set and access both of these awesome sets of capabilities. When we think about ng-add, we also think about other products, such as Progress Kendo UI. So Kendo UI is a fantastic component library for Angular. And I can imagine a future, and we're working with them to make this a reality, where I can take any Angular application, and I'm going to ng-add Kendo. And what will happen is not only will I get the dependencies installed, but they can pre-configure my application to take advantage of Kendo. And another thing that we did in our most recent 6.0 release of Angular is we shipped a bunch of what we call starter components. Because what we found is that with component libraries, it's not always easy to take this massive set of components and say, how should I compose these things? How should I bring them all together to build a great experience? And so we're working with the Kendo team to try and make starter components so that developers can quickly add Kendo to their projects and see instantly, using starter components, how these things could be used and give developers a jumping point to start customizing and to start configuring their applications. We also think about content management systems like Sitefinity. Historically, it's actually been very hard to use Angular with a content management system because Angular tends to want to own the entire application orchestration, which is in a little bit contrast to where you have a content management system where you want the customizability and flexibility on an administrative side of things to make those sorts of changes. And so the Angular team has been thinking a lot about this. And so we've decided and found a way to actually bridge some of that gap using web standards. So the web standard that we're talking about is called custom elements or web components. And so very recently, we launched a new project called Angular Elements that allows you to take Angular components that have been built and package them as a custom element. And the magic here is that instead of relying on Angular to be doing the bootstrapping of components and manifesting them into the user experience, we can actually rely on the browser. And so today, this works within an existing Angular context. So for example, we use this on angular.io. So whenever you're browsing our content, you're also going to see some of that content being enriched by live functionality. And in the future, in the next version of Angular Elements, one of the things that we're going to be seeing is that you can take Angular components, packaged as custom elements, and actually ship them into other contexts. So I could, for example, create an Angular application and say, hey, I've built these 4 or 5 components that are really great, right? Maybe I've wrapped some Kendo UI components with some custom business logic for my business. And it would be awesome if I could take those things and then ship them as a JavaScript file, share that with some of my Sitefinity developers, and then actually dynamically bootstrap that functionality within the content layer of the web. And so this is a project that we're really excited about. We hear from developers all the time about this. So today, Angular Elements works within an Angular context, but we're really focusing on the bundling and packaging side that makes it easy to take advantage of Angular Elements in a lot more contexts. So I just want to summarize some of the things that we've covered today. So the web and kind of software development in general is changing. Everything we do, we need to think about how can we bring it closer to the user and build better experiences to make both our team members and our users more effective and more productive. We've talked a little bit about how Angular thinks about some of these problems and how we're trying to push the limits of the web. And we've talked about some of the ways that Angular fits so nicely with things like NativeScript and Kendo UI. And I think we've seen that across a lot of ProgressNEXT, and we've heard from a lot of Angular developers so far. So the last thing I want to leave you with is that combining tools like Angular and NativeScript is really going to help you deliver great experiences, not just today, not just tomorrow, but in the future and beyond as well. If you want more information about Angular and the work we're doing with NativeScript and Progress, feel free to follow me on Twitter, @StephenFluin. Thank you so much.